Hi, my name is Lara Skaggs, and I'm the State Program Administrator for Health Occupations Education. I'm here today with three of my predecessors. I'd like to introduce you to each one of them. This is Yvonne Bender Goin. Yvonne began in the CareerTech system in 1958 in Tulsa, and she retired in 1986. This is Mary Randall. Mary began her career with vocational technical system in Norman in 1969.
Right.
She retired in 1990, and she has come back out of retirement just within the last 6 months to help our program. This is Wanda Wolf. Wanda began her career at Canadian Valley in El Reno in 1970. Wanda is still serving CareerTech at Metro Technology Center in Oklahoma City. I want to thank you all for coming today. And Yvonne, let's just go ahead and get started with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what your first program was like? What was it like when you first began in the vocational system?
Well, when I came into Stillwater at first, I believe there were 7 programs of practical nursing, and Mrs. Burris did all the supervising for them. My position was to provide for nurse aid training primarily, but anything that we could train for in nursing homes and hospitals. And it was terribly different than it is today. You do have certification today for nurse aides, don't you?
Yes.
And is it required by law?
Yes.
You know, what we wanted for so many years and couldn't get. Our nurse aid programs, I went out and talked to hospital and nursing home administrators, nursing directors and so on, and found out what their needs were and told them what I could do and proceeded to help them set up if that's what they wanted. We had our classes were about 30 hours at that time. I don't know what they are now for certification. What are they?
Minimum 75.
75.
Certification now.
Well,
yeah.
Probably needs to be that much or more. We met in every conceivable place you can imagine. And I'm serious when I say closets, because one place we met, that's the only space they had they could clean out was a big closet that the employees used for their coats and hats and what have you. We set it up to use like that, and we would go to an empty room, an empty bed in an empty room for them to do their bed making practices and that sort of thing. Equipment was all at that time furnished by the agency we were doing it for. And I was probably running 75 to 100 classes a year.
Wow.
I did an awful lot of footwork. I did an awful lot of wearing tires on cars because I was all over the state.
Yeah.
I didn't have a designated area as such, except that I was in the training for those levels of people, and Mrs. Burris was doing the practical nursing.
That's great, thanks. Mary, how about you? What was it like when you began?
I started down at Norman, and at that time it was not even it was a vocational program, but we did not have a vocational school at that time. And I literally fell into the position as a PN coordinator because at that time they started requiring a bachelor's degree for the coordinator, and I had gone out to get some information to use for a career day at a high school. And so, as I said, I met the qualifications, so I was on board. I didn't even know what an LPN was, my husband recently retired from the military, so I had no idea what I was getting into. And but as I said, we had a nice facility. The only program that we had there was a practical nursing program, which was heavily funded and administered by the hospital and the Norman public school system. And so jumped on board. And as I said, we really did have a nice facility, small but nice. And so that's when I started. I was down there for 6 years as PN coordinator. And during that 6 years, that was the time that the Moore Norman VOTEC school was built, just about the middle of that, about 73, 74, somewhere along in there. And so then I helped with the designing and planning for that, and we really did have a wonderful PN program down there. Then in '76, I joined I came on board at the State Department, and Yvonne was my first boss, my supervisor.
How about you, Wanda? What was it like at Canadian Valley?
Well, unlike Yvonne, we had a brand new building. I started the program at Canadian Valley in 1970 when the school opened. I was a pretty recent graduate from nursing school. I had finished a bachelor's degree in nursing from OU. I had worked a year at Parkview Hospital in El Reno, and then a year at Canadian Valley Clinic for some doctors. And I knew that they were building the VOTEC school, and I thought, I'll go out and talk to them and find out about what they have. And they were in a building downtown El Reno. And I went in and talked to them, and they had hired the nursing coordinator. It was Margaret Brock. And I was going to talk to her about teaching in practical nursing, and they said, well, where are you working now? And I said, I work at Canadian Valley Clinic. And they said, can you teach medical assisting? And I said, probably. So they sent me to see Yvonne Bender. And the programs that we established that year were medical assisting. I taught medical assisting half day, and a program called Health Services Occupations. Then that program became Health Services Careers, and then it became Allied Health Careers, and now it's called Health Science Technology. I was one of about 7, don't you think, Yvonne? There were only about 7 teachers that time. And I stayed at Canadian Valley for 3 years. I taught Health Services Careers and medical assisting. And then in 1974, went to Gordon Cooper Technology Center in Shawnee and was there from 74 to 80. And at that time, there were some changes going on here at the State Department. Mary had become the state supervisor and was looking for a HOSA state advisor. And I had been very actively involved in HOSA since its inception. And so that's how I got started at the State Department in the Health Occupations Division. I was Assistant State Supervisor for HOE and HOSA State Advisor. And I was here for 10 years, from 80 until 90, and then went to Metro Tech at the Health Career Center and have been there ever since.
That's
Laura, I
great.
want to jump in and say
Sure.
something here. When you start looking for people to fill a position, this was the only one, in my opinion, in the state that could fill that position as HOSA State Supervisor and as Assistant Program Supervisor for secondary. This was her area of expertise, both of them.
So at that time, the program specialists, as we call them now, were divided into secondary and adult students, basically, what you
we
supervised?
sort of did that because we only, well, for what, 1, 2, how many years? It was just Wanda and me, and so she did secondary and HOSA, and I did adult and then administration. And then we eventually got a second assistant, and so then the second assistant took over more of the adult programs, but Wanda continued to stay with the secondary and continued to do HOSA.
Sounds like your plates were very full.
I don't remember exactly the number of programs, but we sort of made a vow that first year that we were going to visit every health occupation program in the state, one or the other of us, and by golly, we did.
We did. We were in every program every year, and for new teachers, we were in their programs a couple times a year.
Tires are still being worn off,
Yes,
I think. So what would you all say some of the major changes are that have occurred over time?
Oh, golly.
Well, I think the biggest major change is the area schools. When we tried to teach some of these classes, in some of these wild places we had to teach them in. It was bad.
Yeah.
But the area schools have really been a godsend.
And that was so funny because if you, again, on the basis of what Yvonne has said, you know, the Health Occupations Division had to do everything from finding the facility to processing the finances to find the teacher, you name it. There wasn't all of the assistance that we now have in an area school, you know, administrative assistance such as we have today, but at that time there was none of that.
So you did all of the coordination activities then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We went out and recruited the class, and then we recruited the students, and then we recruited the teacher, and then we recruited the space.
Yeah.
I think the thing that really happened in the secondary programs, the allied health careers, medical assisting, dental assisting, those programs really grew fast, especially the allied health careers, because it covered a broad spectrum of what students could go into. And every year we would double in numbers of programs that we had. But as far as the programs themselves over the last 30 years, of course technology has made a big difference. I think about when I taught medical assisting and we had all those Selectric typewriters in there, and now students certainly don't know how to use typewriters, and they all are, you know how to get on the internet, and the technology is so advanced, and the students have a lot more information than they had when I was teaching high school students. Things just move very rapidly today.
And the curriculum, I mean, you looked, and Lara, since you have worked over in the curriculum division, the curriculum at that time, Yvonne, the teachers developed all of their own curriculum, their test questions, and I remember when we were putting together tests, and we were talking about Nettie Seals a while ago, she pulled together the first document of test questions, and boy, we had collected tests from all of the teachers, and we had some some questions that left a lot to be desired, but by golly, it was better than any other state had.
Well, we had some workshops to try to help the teachers figure out and then learn how to write test questions.
And see, Lara,
because test questions can be so tricky, or they can be meaningful.
And you realize you're talking to a testing expert.
Maybe so.
I don't know if I'd say an expert.
But that problem, though, still hasn't changed. We are still getting teachers from industry. They are wonderful specialists in whatever area, whether it's medical, nursing, or practical nursing, or whatever. They know their technical skills, but as far as being teachers, Lara still has a tremendous challenge as far as preparing them to be teachers. Yeah. And that part hasn't changed too much, has it?
That's right. It doesn't sound like it. Well, Mary, I know you've had a very unique opportunity. I guess I'll call it an opportunity. Okay. It's been an opportunity for me for you to have been retired for 10 years and to come back out of retirement to help the division again. And so I know you've probably you've really been able to see the similarities and the changes. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because we visit a lot in my car, and I know that it's kind of ironic, some of the things that we've discovered.
Well, you know, there is a lot of deja vu on these past 10 years. For example, Yvonne, on the articulation in nursing, I can't believe that was going on, 80s, 70s, I don't know how far back. We're still talking about it. We still are not where we ought to be in that particular area, and that was a bit of a shocker. As I said, also as far in regard to the teachers, we still do not have these teachers out there ready to come on board and teach. We still have to, they're good nurses, they're good dental assistants or whatever, but we still have to have lots of workshops and such to prepare them to be teachers. I think probably some of the things that the changes in technology are just unbelievable. But now I haven't seen it, and I don't know whether you have, Yvonne, or not, but the new health facility at Francis Tuttle. Have you been there, Wanda? Well, I know Lara has, and she could tell us about it, but I guess it is just unbelievable. But all of our schools, all of our tech centers, as far as I'm concerned, we have marvelous facilities. to prepare the health field. And the other thing is, it's unbelievable, Yvonne, the diversity that Laura deals with in her position.
Oh, yeah.
The different kinds of programs. You know, I think probably when I was on board before 90, we had maybe 15 or so different programmatic areas, something like that. I have no idea how many they have today.
Oh, I would say over 20. I don't think I brought information with me. I don't know exactly how many. It seems like a new one every day. As a matter of fact, we're working on a different type of program right now. We've been working with teachers, and we also are in a high school setting now too, where I spent the day yesterday working on high school academy programs, where we're...
See, this is a whole new concept,
Right.
and the concept that you have out at Putnam City. It's just I think that's one of the big changes, is the diversity in programs. And of course, for a computer illiterate, I think that's probably the biggest change.
Oh, yes.
But I mean, when I think back, Yvonne, on the time that it took us to send out a mail out to our teachers, from getting it printed and folded and stuffed
They do it all with email.
with one push of the button. She goes in there.
You know, I probably miss the newsletter out of VOTEC as much as anything else, and we don't own a computer and don't want one. But if I had the facility for it, I'd probably get the newsletter. I miss not getting it.
Yes, yes.
One of the things for secondary teachers that has had a big impact is that we realized once we started teaching that we had to get this thing called a teaching certificate, because to teach high school students, you had to be certified. And back in those days, most of the teachers who came into the system were diploma graduates. They had a diploma from a hospital-based nursing program. I was fortunate because my mother insisted that I go to a college and get a degree. So I had a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing, and I was the first health occupations education teacher to receive a teaching certificate. But we've had a program at the Central State University, the University of Central Oklahoma, that has evolved over the years into a wonderful program. It serves, you know, all of our teachers that are teaching in secondary programs, and many of those that teach in adult programs.
Now?
Dr. Karen Barnes came to that program when Lou Ebright left. She was a teacher in their nursing program at UCO, and she's come over to the teacher ed program. But I remember the very first teacher educator that we had, Leroy Overstreet. And I remember when he came to August conference and told us about this fabulous deal he had worked out for us so that we could do one semester of student teaching to get our teaching certificate. And we all looked at him and said, are we going to have to quit our job to do a semester? He said, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So he worked to get it waived that if you had, I think it was 3 years of successful teaching experience, then you didn't have to do student teaching. But it was really a very difficult thing to get all those teachers in, because most of them didn't have degrees. You couldn't get a teaching certificate without a degree. So that's been a big impact
change.
of people going to school. Now people are coming out with degrees, and it's a lot easier to get them certified.
When Leroy Overstreet started, his doctorate was in health education, but physical education, and not, you know, as we thought of it. When Dr. Mack came, he came with the credentials ready to teach the kinds of things we needed to have taught. And I thought an awful lot of Leroy Overstreet, and I know Wanda did.
He got us off. He got us off and going.
He did. He sure did. But he was, he really was not. In fact, I took him to any number of places to help him get a little oriented to our program. I took him to hospitals, I took him to nursing homes, I took him to schools, everything you can think of to help him understand where we were coming from, so that he'd understand.
So I think at this point we've had, what, 3 teacher educators? 4.
4 now.
4, you have it.
Leroy,
Then
Leroy
Luke
Overstreet.
Louis
Dr.
Bright was
Mack
one
was
of our
second,
teachers.
and then Louis Bright, who was the
now
third
Dr.
one, and then
Barnes.
Dr. Barnes. So that
And
brings
Lou
us
was
up-
teaching in the Oklahoma City school
right.
when I came on board. She was a teacher. She, you know,
And see, Dr. Mack I always thought brought a lot to our division because well, he was retired military also, so I thought he was pretty neat. But he he had been involved in the health arena in the military, and he had a background, had his doctorate, and he had a background in education, so he could relate to health people. And he and his wife Marilyn were just really, really wonderful people, I thought.
Well, it still is a challenge for us today, having instructors that come from industry, and they're required to take hours, and many of them do that during their first year of teaching, so there's a lot of stress involved, and that's one of the challenges we're working on and trying to figure out a way to make it better for our
Laura,
instructors.
you know, talking about the difference, I think the one thing that we'd mention, something that they have come up with, and I think it has a lot of pluses, a lot of merits, Yvonne, that's what they call an alternative certification. And it is primarily for T&I and health, and it is for teachers, for personnel that are coming directly from industry. And it is geared to their needs. I'm looking at it now. I don't know that much about it yet, but I'm working on it. But it just seems like it has a lot of pluses as far as meeting our needs
We
for.
have several teachers that have gotten their certification that way.
But I
That
think
way.
it's good. Mm-hmm.
well, probably the very biggest change in VOTEC while I was working was the area schools. You know, they were. We helped draw the floor plans. We did everything.
We really did. It was great fun. It was great.
Well, the superintendent at that time down at Ardmore called Mr. Perky. We used to laugh and say they were both good Democratic cigar-chewing guys. They both had a cigar in their mouth most of the time, and he's supposed to call Mr. Perky, and he says, "JB, it takes one man 30 days, it'll take 30 men one day. I want them down here tomorrow." And the call went out, and we all went home and packed our bags and took off for Ardmore.
Wow.
And we were down there the next day. We met the architects, we met everybody you can think of, really, that had anything to do with school board members and what have you. And we drew plans, we wrote equipment lists, we did all of that stuff one day.
Wow.
One day.
But there were some tired people at the end of that day.
We were absolutely bushed, but we got a floor plan. We saw a whole floor plan before we left the building that day.
It was a lot of fun having that kind of input. I don't know how much you have today, Laura, but, you know, for example, take out at Woodward. We lucked out there because at the time they were building that school, the hospital was going through a remodeling phase, so we were able to plan an area, and it was actually an intensive care unit, in our nursing lab that was very, very comparable to what the hospital had. So it wasn't a great transition when the students went from the training facility to the hospital. Another unique experience was when we put in a program. Now, this was not a VOTEC school, but it was out at Shattuck when we had 3 schools that went together to put in a practical nursing program. And of course, at that time, the Shattuck Hospital was a marvelous, marvelous hospital. And so that was a neat experience. And then Wanda's facility down there, that was great fun planning. Bill Phillips, who was superintendent at that time, said he wanted the most advanced facility that we could possibly build. For example, want to tell about the floor and such, what we did in that lab down in your science lab. It's neat.
He had a lot of vision
Yes.
in building our Health Careers Center. As Mary's talking about the floors, there's a concrete slab, and then there are steel piers so the floor is really 2.5 feet above the slab, and it's in these big chunks of concrete and tile, and it takes huge suction cups to pull those out and move them. But you can bring up electricity, water, suction, oxygen, anything, anywhere in the building that you need to. In the labs, you can configure those. For example, we had one room that we were using just as a classroom. We converted it to a medical assisting lab and put in operatories just as in a doctor's office. So it's a very flexible building. And the thing that was good about that is when they were building the building, we went down to the committee meetings. For example, when they were building, the day they were working on the nursing lab, Mary sat in on the program. When we were working on the dental assisting lab and the Allied Health Careers lab, I sat in on the meetings. So we really had a lot of input, and the building is very, very functional. You've been there and you know how wonderful it is.
We had in absolute contrast to that, we had one superintendent who, I said, where are we going to have some running water? They already had all the cabinets in, they had all this stuff. He says, running water? What do you need running water for? And I said, have you ever been in a hospital? I won't tell you where it was, but we...
No, we better not.
We had
Still there.
we had, no, I'm not sure, but anyway, we had some fun times with those things. And it did take tearing up a floor, doing all kinds of things to get the water into the lab that those people had to have. And the last time I saw it, it still wasn't really a very functional lab.
Right.
I was invited to go to a school that was putting in new programs, and they had this, the director was very proud of this big, huge open lab. And I said, well, you know, you're going to need some privacy curtains between these beds. And he said, why? And I said, well, the students are going to be bathing. They're going to be bathing each other. And he said, really bathing? They're really going to do these things? And that was a big shock for some of these administrators that had come from the common schools into the VOTEC schools at that time, is that we really were going to work on each other and work on patients. I had one superintendent who said to me, well, Ms. Wolf, can you tell me what the benefit is of taking these kids out to doctor's offices? And I had to explain to him that, well, you could bring tractors out here for diesel, and you could bring cars out here for auto mechanics, but you can bring patients out here to take care of. So we had to go where they were. And he said, oh, I never had thought of that. So, you know, as it evolved, it was a whole new concept.
We had another school official that decided one day that he wasn't feeling very well. He wanted to be the patient, and he was.
Sometimes they get more than they bargained for there. It's bathing day. I bet they get up and leave pretty quick.
That was funny along that line. You may want to go on something else, but in Tulsa, we had started the OR technician program. Superintendent, one day we went over there for a supervisory visit, and so we went to visit the students in the clinical area, and he couldn't believe it. He got to put on his gown and mask and everything and go into the OR. That was the highlight for a long, long time. But you know, bottom line, the tech center superintendents and administrative personnel, we always felt very special to them. Health occupations, I always felt.
They've had to be very, very flexible in their ideas because there were so many things had to be different than they ever imagined.
That's true, but they rarely, and they would have a good reason. If we got turned down, Wanda, you and I worked together probably most, there were very few things we were ever turned down on. And at that time, we had only 2 programs, I think, Durant and where was the other one? In comprehensive high school, Altus. Durant and Altus were the only high school programs. So, you know, you asked about changes a while ago. That's a big change, that you have more things going on in high schools than what we did back then.
And we still want more.
We're greedy.
More.
We're greedy. We
That's
still
right.
want more.
Let's talk a little bit about HOSA. I understand before HOSA, we were a part of another organization. Do you want to visit about that a little bit? Wanda, you're our HOSA guru.
Wanda, you're it.
She's the guru.
That's right.
When I began teaching at Canadian Valley, we didn't have Health Occupation Students of America. We had VICA, and all of our students belonged to VICA. We kind of were an outgrowth from the trade and industrial programs until we got our own division, and we were under VICA for several years. In 1974, a group of people met in Cherry Hill, New Jersey to form a national student organization for health occupations education students. The state supervisor at that time was Pat Jameson, and she went to that meeting. And then in 1976, we had the Constitutional Convention in Arlington, Texas. I remember in 1974 when we were looking at a health occupations student organization for Oklahoma, my superintendent called me to his office, Dr. John Bruton, and he said, we've gotten this letter about whether we should start this student organization for health occupation students. He said, do you want to be part of that? And I said, well, you know, Dr. Bruton, if it's going to be good, yes, but if it's not going to be any good, I'd rather stay with VICA. And he said, well, Wanda, who do you think's going to make it good?
Good for him.
And, you know, he was right. And so I decided that day I was going to get involved, and we were going to be the best organization we could be. Years later, when I came to work in the Health Occupations Division, I was going through some files, and I looked at that survey that had been sent out that asked us if we wanted to participate, and that's what I had written. If it's going to be good, I want to be a part of it, but if it isn't going to be good, I don't want to do anything with it.
And what did you do to help? I know that
We
you had
had
a big part in what
we
made
had
it
a very
good in
strong
Oklahoma.
local HOSA chapter. In fact, I was thinking about this at the very first state HOSA conference, or no, the very first national HOSA conference that was in Oklahoma City. In 1978, one of my students was the keynote speaker, Jennifer Rooker, and Mary and I have laughed about that since. We told her, well, there'll be about 700 people there, and you can do it, and it won't be any big deal. This little girl from McLeod High School got up on that podium and looked across the Gold Crown Room at the Lincoln Plaza and saw those 700 people, and the first words out of her mouth were, wow. They told me there were going to be 700 people, but I didn't know how many that was really going to look like. But we've really grown a lot since
You had a little bit of change from that first state meeting we had in Tulsa.
Oh, yes.
Where we,
Tell us about that.
we had 100 students. I don't remember how many could come from each program or
So that's
something. I can't
We did
remember
it.
exactly how we did it, but we had exactly 100 students up there. I know that Naomi Costin had one student do something she wasn't supposed to do, and Naomi just loaded her on the bus and called her parents and told them she was on her way home.
Well, we
And it
did
made a believer out of it. We never had a major problem of the kids leaving the convention to go do something else, you know, when they weren't supposed to.
Sure didn't.
It was really something. And the girl that was the, I guess she was some kind of a recruiter for the, the motel we stayed in, Wanda.
Tulsa Chamber of Commerce.
And catering, sales and catering person for the hotel.
She really and truly was a big help to me. We had a table that wasn't as wide as this, but it was probably this long, and we had all of the trophies standing on it. And somebody leaned on it and knocked it over, and all the trophies went like that. And I know it nearly killed her, because she was the one that had talked me into trying to have it sit on the outside, and they'd move it in, see. Well, it wasn't in the moving that it happened or anything. Somebody leaned on it and down it went. And some of the trophies were damaged, but we got them put back together well enough to issue them to the kids, and then we replaced their trophies. But
as far as I can remember, it seems that first HOSA conference we did in conjunction with the VICA conference.
I think
at the
we
same
did several
time.
years.
And we had HOSA winners and we had VICA winners. HOSA was off in another building, but I think some of the competitions, the judges were the same, and like dental assisting and medical assisting. We did it all together, but it didn't take us long to realize we wanted to do our own thing.
yeah.
Laura,
And
Oklahoma.
These two ladies were very instrumental in getting
We had a
HOSA
lot of
going.
good help. But you know, throughout the years, Yvonne, you said we'd never really had any major problems with students. We didn't, because our advisors, when they came to the conferences, they knew they were responsible for the students. Now, we were there to back them up and help. Not Wanda. No.
Mary and I, she doesn't want me to tell this, but one time Mary and I got to meet Barry Switzer up close and personal,
yes.
because we had our conference at the Lincoln Plaza, and that was at the time when the OU football team stayed at the Lincoln Plaza on the Friday night before a home football game. Well, we happened to be having HOSA Fall Leadership Conference there that same weekend, and we had a dance, and several of the football players wanted to come to our dance. We didn't let them come, but as the girls were coming out, they got acquainted with some of those girls, and we had a little bit of a challenge and went looking for Barry Switzer and met him, and Mary told him that he needed to corral his football players, and he sent one of the Selman brothers to do that. But it was a very interesting situation.
To put it lightly.
It was fun.
But Oklahoma, I think, and again, it's because of people like these two sitting here. Oklahoma has always been a leader in HOSA. I mean, from day one.
Well,
and
we were one of the first
6.
One of the 6 charter states.
Charter states.
See, there were at that constitutional convention, if you call those 6 charter states, each one had 2 voting delegates. Those 12 delegates were the ones that selected the Constitution, and so much of the business. Those 12 delegates did it, but throughout the years,
those states were New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma.
Alabama, New Jersey, and North Carolina.
And North Carolina.
And that's a HOSA Bowl question.
Oh,
Is it?
good to know.
6 charter states.
But then Yvonne was state supervisor down in Arlington, and at that time she invited or agreed that Oklahoma would be the site for the first national convention. And here again, our area VOTEC schools, at that time as they were called, helped us out, because we didn't have penny one to do that convention with. And each of our schools, they contributed $100 in seed money. So that was what we used as seed money for that national convention. But on through the years, I think, and Yvonne, or Wanda, I think, to the best of my knowledge, we've always had somebody from Oklahoma on the national board, or within maybe the last few years.
The last few years we haven't had any national officers, but we used to have national officers every year. In fact, one year 5 of the national officers were from Oklahoma. And then National HOSA passed a rule that you could only have 1 or 2 people from each state run. But even the national organization has grown so much.
Oh, yes, it has.
Yeah. And we have always, up until the last few years, had someone on the national HOSA board of directors, and that's been a plus. And you know, HOSA did something differently from any other organization. Instead of us collecting money and such to build a national building, we opted many years ago to select a national management team. HOSA does not own any national property. We contract with a managerial team, and we have since day one, and again, as far as I know, it has worked out very, very well, and their contract is just renewed every year, every 3 years or something like that. And it's been a different concept than the other divisions, other student organizations have done.
Are the contests and things that are done at HOSA conventions the same as they were?
We started out with about 6 competitions. One of them was a poster contest, and the students did their poster and sent it in ahead of time, and Mary and I looked at those and said, okay, something's wrong with these rules. We're going to have to make sure they do those posters here, because they were very, very good. We had medical assisting, we had nurse aid, practical nursing, a speaking competition, and job seeking. So we started out, and the competitive events have just grown tremendously, especially in the skills areas, which is the hardest area to develop. And the people at National HOSA tell us we can't add any more skills events. We can add as many leadership events as you want to do, and that's the direction that they've gone with knowledge tests and biomedical debate and research persuasive speaking, but those skill areas are really hard to develop and hard to stay current.
To manage.
Who are some of the people who you would say contributed the most? Besides you three, of course. Who are some of the other leaders in the...
We really didn't do it all, did we?
I don't believe we did.
Well, I'll just have to say that when I came in to the system, the very first person I met was Yvonne. Yvonne took me to Autry Technology Center to look at the medical assisting program that was taught by Mary Jane Weldon. We drove up there one day. The next day she sent me to an allied health, no, Vernice was teaching medical assisting too. Medical assisting program at Foster Estes Votech, which is now part of our school system, part of Metro Tech, and Vernice James, actually it was Vernice Kemp at that time, was teaching medical assisting down there. And that was in 1969 that I went to visit that program. And so Yvonne was very instrumental in my being involved. Also Pat Jamison. Pat was the state supervisor that was really involved when we started getting teachers certified. I said earlier that I was the first HOE teacher to get certified, but she was the first one to get her teaching certificate because she was a state supervisor. So she got the first teaching certificate. She was very concerned about credentialing.
Well, I want to tell you a little secret. Ruth Burris had her teaching certificate
That's right,
before
she
she ever came on.
But not in
And-
health occupations education.
Yes, well, no, hers was in home
It was in home
economics.
ec.
But what she taught was the Red Cross and First Aid
yeah.
courses at OSU.
And then the other person for me was Mary Randall, because when I came on board, she was the state supervisor, and Mary and I made a lot of trips together, ate a lot of pie together, and a lot of Mexican food. Spent a lot of time traveling, but we felt like we really developed a lot of good programs. So I would say those three ladies in the health occupations division, because I know there were people there prior to that, but I had no knowledge of those people. So those three were most influential for me.
Do either one of you have other people
Well,
you'd like
I'd
to
say,
add?
Of course, Yvonne was, well, Pat was the state supervisor when she was the one that encouraged me to come on board at the state level. And of course, before that, well, she was also the supervisor down at, my state supervisor when I was down at Norman. But then, of course, Pat was the state supervisor, and she is the one that encouraged me to come on board at the state level. And then Yvonne was my supervisor. And so those two, and of course, even though he was not health occupations, that was Francis Tuttle. I mean, that man, anything that we wanted to do in health occupations, and I've told a lot of people this, he never said no to health. He'd say, well, now, Mary, you need to go back and think about it a while. But he wouldn't say no, and so I knew that was my indication to go back to the drawing board. But he influenced a great deal what we did in health, in my opinion, because as I said, he was very supportive of us.
And I would say Dr. Tuttle, Dr. Alexander, and Vic Van Hook were really very supportive of our health occupations programs.
See, I would have to give an awful lot of credit to Burl Killian.
Yeah.
And what did Burl do? And what did Burl do?
Well, he started out as an ag
Okay.
supervisor, but he was the one that was in charge of the occupational programs when I went in as state supervisor.
Now, did Vic succeed? Who succeeded Burl? Was that Vic, or was that who?
Yeah.
Yes.
Vic did.
Yeah. And of course, Larry Hansen, he was head of area schools. Am I right?
He had been a head of manpower. He had the veterans programs after World War II. You name it, Larry did it. I never will forget going in his office one day, and it's when he was over in the west end of the building, and he had a very small outer office, and then his office was a little bit bigger, and there were piles of papers all the way around the floor. I mean, as close as he could get them to the wall, and as close as he could stack them together. And he said, I said, "What you doing, Larry?" And he said, "I'm working on my pilot system. You pilot here, and you pilot here, and you pilot there."
I think I've adopted that system. I used to have a clean desk.
Ron can talk more about the earliest state supervisors and health occupations that Mary and I didn't really know.
That would be nice.
Well, Ruth Burris was the first one, of course, and she and a lady by the name of Hockaday, and I cannot remember her first name. Hockaday was the state supervisor that started about the same time Ruth Burris did in Arkansas. And they...
Edna. Was it Edna or Ruth?
I don't remember. I absolutely do not remember.
But I know the name.
But she and Ruth were the ones that probably got started first in the practical nursing programs in the 2 states under T&I. See,
And do you know about what year that was?
I can't tell you for sure, but she had been on board 5 years when I came in the State Department and was already separated from T&I.
Okay.
What year?
Now,
You know.
I cannot tell you what year she was separated from them.
But you started in the 50s, so it would
Well, in the state office, 63, I think.
Okay.
or
So
something.
it would have
they
been
were
sometime in the
separated then.
50s.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they were both still under T&I, but they had separate offices and separate
Right.
assistants and secretaries and everything. So,
Well, now, if we remembered our history of vocational education, we would know when that all happened.
Just thinking
yes.
Lucille Patton would not be happy with that.
if you didn't remember all those dates.
dates.
And then when she retired, now she'd worked up at OSU for a long time, so she retired from OSU and Votech. Then Clara Brentlinger was brought in. Clara had her degree and her master's. Huh? I can't tell you for sure. I think her degree was in nursing, but I'm not sure what her master's was in. But she worked the 5 years and then had resigned, and Pat Jameson came in. I couldn't tell you that much about Pat's educational background. I just don't know. I know she had spent most of her nursing was in rehabilitation.
Okay.
She had worked in a rehab hospital. But I don't, that's about as much as I can tell you about them. Ruth, of course, lived in Stillwater and had raised her daughter in Stillwater. Clara had lived in Enid, raised her children over there. Clara is in Tulsa now, and of course Ruth is deceased.
Pat was on board, what, about 3 years? How long was Pat Jameson?
I really and truly cannot tell you for sure. About 3 or 3.5 years.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and what the girl's name was that had the long black hair, isn't that terrible that I cannot remember? But she's the one that Pat told her to clean out the files, and she's the one that threw away all of the reports of all of the meetings that we'd had that told you everything that had ever happened in practical nursing practice.
Historical component.
And I said something to when Ruth was still down at the Cove.
In Yukon,
Yes, Spanish Cove is what I'm trying to say. And I asked her if she still had any of her personal copies of those things, because I wanted copies of them. I did not have copies. And she said, no, I had to get rid of all that stuff when we moved down here. Well, I can understand that. Some of those reports, when we would have a faculty meeting, usually down in Oklahoma City at the Board of Education, was where we met because they had space and cafeteria facilities, and that sort of thing. All of the practical nursing teachers. Now that's all it was, and there were about 17 or 18 of us. And we would meet for 2 or 3 days and talk over every problem you can possibly think of. And the problems were stated, and the possibilities for change were stated, and the conclusions that we came up with in those reports. So you would have had all of that, and it all got thrown away. I didn't realize what was happening until it was already done, or I'd have probably snatched and grabbed if I had to get them out of the wastebasket, you know, but I didn't.
Laura, Yvonne is quite a historian.
Yeah.
And I will have to tell you something funny about history. You were saying the first thing that you learned when you came on, or that you got involved. You want to know the first thing where Yvonne took me? When I came on board, why, we traveled, and she was teaching me how to be an assistant supervisor, and
She took
so
me. I know
and
what
I
you're gonna
took you. So
say.
this is what somebody's going to have to take you down there. But you know, the circus. There is a circus that winters in Hugo, Oklahoma. Did you know that?
I did know that.
Well,
I did know that.
have you been out to the cemetery?
No, but I've
You
seen
need to go-
signs.
All right, now tell them
to
about
go-
it, Laura.
You need to go out to
Yvonne.
that cemetery, because the stones out there of the Miller family, the Miller Circus is what it is. And there's one stone out there that's probably like that the top of it is, the granite is carved like a circus tent.
Wow.
You know, and the rest of them have lots of beautiful carving on them about circus stuff. It's just an education to go out and look at them.
Doesn't have anything to do
Has
with health.
nothing to do
No, it
with
doesn't.
health.
Actually, it's the wrong end of health.
Traveling on
This
your
is
own,
what
but
happens.
we will find a reason to go to Hugo, Laura.
Actually, we need to go to Hugo.
Yes, we
That would
do.
be
Yes,
great.
we do.
Who are your teachers in Hugo now?
Pam Adamson and
I think I know the two that.
I'm not sure.
Adamson
Do I know
was a HOSA state officer. She was a
Okay,
state
that's why
president.
that name is okay.
We have
okay.
several teachers now who were in HOSA and in leadership positions. Pam Adamson, Pam Lewis, Lisa used to be Lockument, Lisa Moreland.
Oh, okay.
There are a lot of them who were actively involved in HOSA and have gone on to teaching roles. It's one of these things about teaching leadership, and then it pays off.
It really does.
What was the little girl's name that was from Newcastle that was the first HOSA president?
Oh, what?
I
It was
think
one of
about her
niece's
every time
students.
we go through Newcastle.
Gray. Gray was her. Yeah, Gray was her last name.
Oh, she was.
Oh, Vernice would be upset with that.
Yes, everybody.
Diana Yates Gray.
that doesn't
And then
sound-
Pam.
I don't think so either, Wanda.
Yes, she was. And then Pam Jackson was from Mid-Dell and was one of the very first. But Diana Yates Gray, she was Vernice's student.
She seems pretty confident.
Yeah, okay, I may be thinking about a delegate. Did,
Yeah, that's right. She was a delegate to the
voting
meeting in Arlington,
Arlington, yep.
instead of a president of the
yeah, so
organization.
you may be right.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we just have a few more minutes, so let me. I have a final question for you. What would be some advice that you would give to the next generation of leaders? Talk to me, ladies. Tell me what's your piece of advice that you could give me that I can share with our teachers who might be aspiring to continue on in the CareerTech system?
Well, I tell you, since October, I've been kind of giving her advice. Some of it she listens and some she ignores. So why don't you all give her some advice?
She's not telling the truth. I listen to everything
She does.
says.
She soaks up
listens to all of
information
it,
like a sponge. She really does, and she uses it. She listens. So this is your chance.
So what would be some good advice? Yvonne?
Oh, I don't know. I think probably the best advice you could give somebody who wants to come in as a teacher is to get as much of their education out of the way first, just because most of the time they're married, sometimes they have children, and try to go to school and teach. It becomes quite a stressful thing. So I would just say, see how much of it you can get before you apply for a job.
That's a good piece of advice.
Yvonne knows And Mary knows too that when I was a health occupations teacher, I had a very young daughter and then I had twin sons.
Yeah.
And when people would say to them, "What does your mother do?" they would say, "HOSA." No one knew what they were talking about. But I think what I would say is to become involved. You know, you
Absolutely.
can't really be an HOE teacher and not be involved. You can't just come and teach and go home. You have to be involved with your students. You have to be involved with the student organization. You have to be involved in the professional organization. And, you know, I just think that's how you learn and that's how you grow and that's how you develop leadership. So that would be what I'd have to say is don't think you can get hired into a job and then just sit back.
No way.
Because
It doesn't work that way.
you don't just, you know, it's not just a job, it's your life, and it
You
has to
get
be.
involved in your own organization and you get involved in your students' organization.
That's good.
Be committed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mary, I know you've got another piece of wisdom. It's inside you wanting to come out.
Well, I
You may have
think
told me some of your pearls, but share with all the instructors who'll be watching this.
no one else can get a word in edgewise when we're traveling, can they, Laura? But no, I think the other thing is to take advantage of every opportunity, you know, whether it is a workshop or whatever, because again, our state agency, I think, has always tried to do a tremendous job of preparing our teachers. And, you know, like I've mentioned to you, Laura, the new teacher activity that Dr. Mack and what was her name, Marie Oberly, started many, many years ago. I think that has been one of the gems of our division. And it's just, you know, these new teachers, they just soak up the information, and that's
really do.
where you begin. But if we could just, and I don't know what the magic answer for our older our experienced teachers, you know, how you get them involved. And if I ever come up with the answer, I'll let you know, Laura.
That's good.
You know, I think if as new teachers, if they will just, or as any teacher, you continue to grow. You have to, because it's like a student said years ago to me, said, in health you either, not just health, but you either progress or regress. You don't stand still.
No, that's right.
And that if we could get that across to our teachers and to our leaders, that we've got to continue to keep up with the times, and easier said than
Another
done.
little gem that I always thought was good that Burl Killian never failed to tell somebody, if you go to a workshop that offers hours, continuing ed or what have you, if you go to a workshop that offers hours, you take it. You take the hours. He said it may involve a little more work, but you take it for the hours. And then he would always tell about the two fellows in ag that were friends of his that had both pretty much been to the same thing. One of them always took the hours and the other one didn't. And he got all the promotions. That's what Burl would say that so easily, you know. He got all the promotions.
Yeah. Well, he probably had a good point.
Sure.
It is. Well, I want to thank you all for your time today. Do you have any, this is your chance, if you have any last minute things you'd like to share. Mary, do you have anything?
You know me, I always have something to say.
Go
But
ahead.
no, what, again, you asked quite a while ago about the changes. Well, you know, when I see the young people can talk about, sorry, nurses and this and that and the other, but when I see the people that are coming into our leadership roles in health occupations and at the ages they are, we're not in too bad a shape. I mean, you look at the board of nursing, we have Kim, who is a youngster. We have Laura here as a youngster. We have a teacher educator that is somewhat, not a little older than they are, but and you look around, and I think you asked about the changes. One of the big ones is I look at some of these young teachers and I think, my goodness, well, Wanda wasn't any older than they are when she started on board,
right.
and but I think we're okay.
I think we're doing okay. Anyone else?
No, we're doing okay.
Yes, I don't know what it would be.
There is such a critical shortage in health care
Yes.
now that I think health occupations is always going to be there. We will never be without jobs. We're always needed.
That's true.
And I think it's important for us to teach that to our students, that there's stability in this area and they're really needed.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough for taking your time today. I'm sure you had other things to do, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get your words of wisdom down on tape. So thank you all for coming, and I guess that's it.
Thank you.